لبيك اللهم لبيك لبيك لا شريك لك لبيك إن الحمد والنعمة لك لا شريك لك.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. As brother mentioned, that the topic for today is did the Prophet ﷺ really love us? And as he also mentioned that it's really a rhetorical question, and all of us as we are Muslims, and regardless of how detached we are from our deen, almost everyone knows something about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And from what they know about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, they know of instances where the Prophet ﷺ went far and ahead, out of his way, in order to do something for his ummah. And you know, I was thinking, instead of me standing here and giving example after example, let me activate some of your brain cells. I know you're in lunch hour and you're thinking that I don't want to do any thinking right now, but inshallah it would be more interesting that way. So if anyone can, from the brothers and sisters, raise your hand and tell us something, tell everyone something that you know from the life of the Prophet ﷺ that really stands out to you. I know that nice thing, all of us know about nice things that he did, but there's always something that he did that stands out to us individually, right? For a doctor, because of his experience, his expertise, something different stands out to him. For a person who's into knowledge and academics, something different stands out to him. So why don't you share something that stands out to you, that you were like, you know what? Wow, the Prophet ﷺ really did this for me. Anyone? I'll start with one. And the thing that really moves my heart is that when the Prophet ﷺ, one day he was talking, he was teaching the Sahaba, and he mentioned my brothers. He mentioned my brothers. And the Prophet ﷺ was talking about the end of times. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the word my brothers, and I believe he was talking about the people who will be with Isa alayhi salam. And he said that they are my brothers. So the Sahaba, they jumped in and they said, Ya Rasulullah, aren't we your brothers? And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, you are my companions. They are my brothers. And you know, when I think about that, I hope that I am one of them. And I'm like, you know, if the Prophet ﷺ called me his brother, the sisters sitting here, the Prophet ﷺ called them his sisters. These are people who the Prophet ﷺ said, in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, they are those who believe in Allah and His Messenger without seeing any of them. For the companions, it was easy. It was a little easy in a relative way. They had other tests that were more difficult. That they saw the Prophet ﷺ, they saw his character, right? They were there when the Prophet ﷺ came out and he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took me from Mecca to Baytul Muqaddas in one night and brought me back. And he took me all the way to the heavens. Now imagine someone comes to you right now, right? Imagine that someone comes to you right now and he says, guess where I was last night? I was in LA. I was in Vegas. If, you know, there may be good things also. And you're like, no, that's not possible because I was with you until 12 o'clock last night. We were hanging out. And he says, no, I went after I went home and I came back and I prayed Fajr in Masjid al-Rahman. And you're like, no man, that's not possible. And he tells you that I've seen this and that and this and that as well. Obviously you will be like, man, this guy is just full of it. But the Prophet ﷺ was telling them something much bigger than that. And you know, in fact, it was such a big test. It was such a big test that many of the people who had accepted Islam actually left it at that time. But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, we know his famous answer. He came out and he said that if the Prophet said it, because he hadn't confirmed it himself, he said if he said it, then it is true. So when the Prophet ﷺ calls us his brothers, that moves me. What moves you? Who would like to be the first from the audience? The first will have the reward for everyone else that does it after. All you have to do is raise your hands. Okay, he beat you to it. Yes, go on.
Basically, like what motivates me more to become like a Muslim is like Prophet, like his mom was always like very peaceful. Like he was gentle with everything in life. Like he never like if anybody was hurting him or anything like that, he wouldn't use revenge or anything like that. But he would use a peaceful like intention, anything like that. But like I don't know anything about that much about the stories, but I know that his life everything was like peaceful. So it motivates me to become more peaceful in this life. Like don't ever use revenge, don't ever use negative thoughts to get back at people.
He was very forgiving, right?
Forgiving, yeah.
So the brother mentions that what he loves about the Prophet ﷺ that moves him is that the Prophet ﷺ was so forgiving towards people. He was peaceful when people came and attacked him. Instead of being revengeful, he was forgiving towards them. And there are many, many different stories of that happening. And then the Prophet ﷺ would go out of his way not to just be forgiving towards them, but to teach others to be the same, right? There was one time when a man came to the masjid and he said something very insulting to the Prophet ﷺ, saying, you haven't given me enough, you haven't done justice to me, right? When some of the remnants of war had come back, what's called the booty of war, and it came back and this man came and said, you haven't done justice to us. So the Sahaba, they were so angry, they were about to kill this guy. But the Prophet ﷺ said, wait. And then the Prophet ﷺ gave the example that the example of you and me is like the example of a man whose camel runs away. And everyone runs after him, and that scares the camel even more, so the camel runs further. But the owner of that camel says, wait, this is my camel, I know what to do with it. So the man takes something in his hand and he goes towards the camel, and the camel comes running back towards his owner, his master. The same way the Prophet ﷺ went and said something in his ear, and the man, he said that now you have said something. The Prophet ﷺ said in his ear that you have said something that has made some of them very angry. That's kind of like it's a beautiful story, and he came back and he said something and everyone was happy. Anyone else? Yes, brother.
I don't know if it's in a hadith that every prophet is given a special prayer, a special dua that is accepted. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he left it. He didn't make it. He said he's going to make it during the day of judgment to save his ummah. To intercede for his ummah.
The amazing thing from the Prophet ﷺ, that every prophet has been given a special dua that it will be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever they ask for will be given. So many of the prophets, all of them, they asked for something in this dunya. Can anyone mention an example of something? Do you know what Nuh alayhi salam asked Allah? He asked Allah to destroy the people. Because he said that if these people live and they continue living, they will not allow anyone else to believe as well. So Ya Allah, destroy them and don't leave a single one alive. So every prophet, they made their dua. And then the Prophet ﷺ saved his dua until the day of judgment. And on that day, he's going to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, forgive my ummah. Anyone else? I have a flu, by the way. It's showing its signs.
There's a hadith where one is that Jibreel came to him to tell him of the message that the angels are waiting for him in Jannah to receive the soul. But he didn't care about that. Because most of us, if somebody came to us and said that angels are waiting for us in Jannah, we would be like, okay, let's go. But he said, what will happen to my ummah after I'm gone? So then Jibreel informed him that the Jannah is made around for everybody else except that's very moving for him to care about us after he's gone.
Right. Brother mentions an example from the life of the Prophet ﷺ at the time of his death, when he knows that it's time for him to go. Even at that time, he mentions the example that if anyone came to us and told us that Jannah is ready for you, we'll be like, let's go, right? But the Prophet ﷺ said, what will happen to my ummah after? What will happen to my ummah? And in fact, there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, when he was sick, he came when he was finally feeling a little bit better. You know the phrase calm before the storm? So the Prophet ﷺ was very sick, but then just before he actually passed away, he felt better. And at that time, he chose to came out to the Muslims. And he came out and he saw the Muslims praying behind Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Everyone was standing in line and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu was leading the salah. And when he saw that, he became so happy. He became so happy, the narrator said that it was as if we were watching the full moon bloom right now. The full moon is coming out right now. But he was so happy when he saw that his ummah is left in a good state. So anyone else want to mention it? Any sisters? Can we go to any sisters? I know from experience that sisters do have a lot to say. From my wife's experience. Anyone? The first sister to speak up will get the reward for everyone else that does speak after her. No? There is nothing that you know, sisters, from the life of the Prophet ﷺ that really moves you. I'm sure there is. Question is, do you want to mention it? No? Okay, we'll move on. Any brothers? One last one. Whoever gets this, whoever raises their hand. Okay, there you go. Right. Yes, that's an amazing one. That the Prophet ﷺ. Now, many of us have heard this many times, and it may seem very regular to us. Like, what's so big about that? Obviously, in Islam, we don't believe that we should kill our daughters. But the Prophet ﷺ was the first one to get up and say that we should not kill our daughters. Right? If we just look at it like that, it's nothing big. But then when you think about it, right? It is going against the whole flow of the society, right? For example, if everyone here, I'm just going to use myself as an example. Everyone here seems to have no problem with me speaking here today, right? But let's say one guy just came in and he said, we cannot let this guy speak here. How would you all feel about him? You would be like, why don't you meet me outside, right? It's something very hard to do, right? The same way, for example, let's say you go to the DMV, right, Department of Motor Vehicles, or you go to the post office. There's a long line, and there's one guy who doesn't speak English well. And whoever the person is on the other side of the counter is insulting them, right? Each and every single one of you, actually, even a better example, I've seen myself on the train, right? That some guy starts insulting, let's say some lady, right? Starts insulting her, cursing at her. Everyone is watching, right? But you know who? The first one to speak up is the hardest. And I'm sure that you've been in that position, and I've been in that position. I was like, you know what? If anybody just opens their mouth, I'm going to go off. But I'm just waiting for someone else to start it, right? That first thing is the hardest. And whoever does that first thing gets the most reward. And that's why that when you look at it that way, that everyone is doing it, then the Prophet ﷺ, the first one to get up and say, this is wrong, you can't do this, right? So with that, we know many examples from the life of the Prophet ﷺ that he went so far ahead to save his people, to bring us to Jannah. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ gave the example that the example of me and the Ummah is like a man sitting by the bonfire, and the mosquitoes and the insects, they are flying straight into the fire, and I'm trying to stop them from going to the fire. That's how the Prophet ﷺ is. He's going out of his way. He could just sit back there and relax, but he goes out of his way to go and to prevent the people from going to hellfire. That's why he said things that at that time nobody was really doing, right? I'll give you an example. He said, do not take the graves of your prophet. Do not take the graves of your prophet as a place of worship. Right? Why did he say that? At that time, all of the Arabian Peninsula had been cleansed of shirk. Right? Nobody was doing shirk except that everyone knew that this is wrong. So why did the Prophet ﷺ say to people like Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali, do not take my grave as a place of worship? You know why? The same example that people are trying to fly into the fire and he's going out of his way to stop them. He's saying, this is fire. If you take my grave as a place of worship, or any grave as a place of worship, you're going towards the fire. Don't do that. He's basically going ahead of time from the knowledge that Allah has given him and warning us beforehand, don't do this. Stay away from this. So, when we know that the Prophet ﷺ loves us, the question is, do we love him back? The question is, do we love him back, and what are we willing to do? On the way here, I was listening to a radio show. Anybody here know WNYC? NPR?
Yeah.
Best radio station, right? Yes, let's give a hand for that. 1010 and all of this stuff is just waste of time. Listen to NPR. Good. And they're nice and kind to Muslims also. Objective, genuine. It's public radio. So there's a show that they had a guy who is actually, he does magic shows. And he calls himself a hardcore atheist. He calls himself a hardcore atheist. So the guy asked him, what do you mean by a hardcore atheist? What's the difference between a hardcore atheist and a garden variety atheist? So he says what it means is that not only I don't believe in God, but if anyone else comes and tells me that I believe in God, I doubt that too. Right? And they're like, I mean, talk more about it. We don't really get where you're coming from. He said that the way I look at it is that if God came down, if Allah came down, and it's a very, even though he's an atheist, but in this point he's very right, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself said to you, sacrifice your child, would you do it? If the answer is yes, then you believe in God. If the answer is anything but yes, maybe I have to see, no, but this and that, he says you're not a believer in God because you're just doing lip service, right? And immediately, you know who I thought of? Who do you think of? Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? Ibrahim alayhi salam, he actually made that ultimate sacrifice. And subhanAllah, from the wisdom and the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he knew that one day someone will get up and raise this question, and we will find an example like that in the Quran. Right? So, when it comes to the love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I have a few points about that. Number one, that if he loves us that much, what are we willing to do for him in return? But that is the second question. But before that, because in this question of what are we willing to do for him, everyone listening?
Yes.
What are we willing to do for him? This is a question that actually misguides some people. Can anyone give me an example who gets examples of groups of people, large numbers of people who have gone misguided because of this particular thing of the love of the Prophet ﷺ? Can anyone give an example? Yes? No? If you're wrong, trust me, I'm not going to do anything. Yes.
Yeah, many people, they claim that they love him, but they don't follow his footsteps.
Right.
And then if someone says something, bad about Sayyidina Muhammad, they become angry, outrageous, and curse, attack the people, things like that.
Right.
It's against his teachings and against his.
That's a really good one. That there are some people out there who they're not actually following the right, they're not paying back the love that they are getting from the Prophet ﷺ, but it's in action. But when someone says anything, they immediately become very angry about that, right? Then there are some people who go even a step beyond. That they say that we love the Prophet ﷺ so much that we are going to do things which he himself didn't do and told us not to do. Right? For example, the Prophet ﷺ said that anyone who opens a door to something new, right, will have that action rejected, right, which is basically muhaddathat, some new innovations in the deen, that the things that the Prophet ﷺ did not do, his companions did not do. But then there are people, out of the love that they have for the Prophet ﷺ, they go and they start doing things which are amazing, but not from the sunnah, right? Which you can see that the thought behind them is really seems deep, right? But it's not coming from the right way, because the love of the Prophet should make us want to listen to him, right? So have you seen examples of people who are going crazy in dancing? You know what? If you ask them, what are you doing? They are dancing and they're shaking their head back and forth, and sometimes they rip their clothes off and they have music going on and all of this stuff. And if you ask them, what are you doing? They say, I'm showing my love to the Prophet ﷺ. Right? I'm showing my love to the Prophet ﷺ. These are people who say, you know what? You'll see them wearing a green turban, right? Anyone seen anyone wearing a green turban? You ask them, brother, why are you wearing a green turban? Why do you always wear a green turban? Is that a sunnah? No. But the reason why I'm wearing it, brother, you are an extremist. The reason why I'm wearing a green turban is because the dome on top of the grave of the Prophet ﷺ is green. So to show my love for him, I'm wearing a green turban. Right? You see how there's something very similar that happened to another religion. And it happened for the same exact reason, the reason of loving their Prophet. Right? And this was the Christians. Do you know that the whole religion of Christianity is based on love for Jesus? The whole religion is based on one thing alone. Now forget even God, forget Allah. Even in their own concept, forget God the Father. The whole religion is based on God the Son. And sadly, there are Muslims out there who have made their practice of Islam not based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but based on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the question that I have, which is very important for us all to really think deeply about, that is, what is the objective? What is the objective in loving the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What do you think? What is the objective? What is the reason why we are talking about loving the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Yes, brother. To please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, exactly. Loving the Prophet is an ibadah to Allah. So we should never get lost in the tool. Loving the Prophet is a tool for us to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we should never get lost in the means and the tool of something and forget the actual objective. Right? Umar radiallahu anhu, he came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam one day. And he said, Ya Rasulullah, I love you more than everything except myself. I love you more than everything that I have except myself. And do you know what the Prophet ﷺ replied? What did he say?
You'll never truly believe until you love for Allah and me is more
He
than
said,
yourself.
not yet. He said, not yet, Ya Umar, not yet. So he went And you know, many of us, we are such shallow people that we would immediately say, okay, ya Rasulullah, okay, we got it. We love you more. But Umar radiallahu anhu, he wasn't a shallow person. He was a serious individual. He went and he pondered over it. And you know what he thought? He said, the one that I love the more than the Prophet ﷺ is myself. But in order to save myself from the fire of hell, I must love him more than myself. So then he came back and he said, Ya Rasulullah, now I love you more than anything else. He said, Al-an, Al-an, now. And first he said, not until you love me more than anything else have you completed your iman. Right? And then when he came back, he said, Al-an, now you have completed it. Now you have completed it. But think about it, that the goal is not to actually get lost in the love of the Prophet ﷺ and try to please him, right? I remember there was an Islamic poem. It was about being more religious and being more attached, and they asked a question. They asked a question in that, and they said, "What will the Prophet say?" They said, he said, what will the Prophet say when he sees us on the Day of Judgment, that we don't have the same facial style as he has, meaning they're talking about a beard, right? Now, the point is really good, but the way they're thinking about it is wrong, because we are supposed to have a beard, not so that we could please the Prophet, but so that we could please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? They were saying, what will you answer to the Prophet ﷺ if he asked you what was wrong with my way of life? What was wrong with my way of keeping the beard? What will you say? It's a good way to think about it, but that's not the perfect way of thinking about it. We are supposed to do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not for anyone else. So, if we understand all of these things, then how do we pay back the Prophet ﷺ? Or how do we even attempt to reciprocate this love, right? Whenever you hear about love, the first thing that comes to our mind is the love between a man and a woman, right? And when we think about that, the love between a man and a woman, when there's love on one side, the other side, once they accept that love, right? Sometimes they're like, man, I can't stand you, get away from her. But once they are both in love with each other, then they both want to reciprocate the love, right? They both want to, the things that you do for me, which are really nice and kind, I want to do them back to you. So the same way, and that goes with any love, it's just that we don't think about other loves like that. That's why with our mothers, right? That when we are young, all throughout life actually, our mothers do so much for us, that when someone gets up and curses our mother, our blood boils, right? Because the love that we have for our mother doesn't allow us to just simply stand by. So the same way, one, we know that the Prophet ﷺ loved us. The question is, what do we do back? What do we do back? Can anyone give an example of something that we can do back? I know the big ones are, we need to follow his example. Right? This is something that is a staple response. And I want you not to go into the staple response, but go into details. What can you do to reciprocate this love that came to us in order to fulfill this ibadah? Right? Our love for the Prophet is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we can do more actions to show our love to him even more, we are pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even more. So what do we do? Yes.
Send blessings on us.
Send blessings upon him. Send salawat upon him as much as we can. That's a really important one. Another one? One of them is, especially in the time that we are living in now, if anyone is to insult them, as Muslims who love him, should never let that go without us doing anything, right? Now, understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you should go and burn a McDonald's, because that's not going to do anything, right? Do you know that happened, right? When these cartoons came out, people went, and in their anger, they burned McDonald's. Like, I cannot understand the connection between the two. But to simply not do anything and just sit there, and I know that in colleges over here, a lot of times these happen, right? Professors talk about Islam, they talk about the Quran, they talk about the Prophet ﷺ. Sometimes they are misinformed, sometimes they're actually picking on certain people in, you know, if they have Muslims and they're trying to press their buttons to see what they say. We should never let that go quiet. Now that doesn't mean that we have to say something immediately. What we have to do is we have to look at the best way to counter that situation, right? One of my teachers, he used to give an example. He used to give two very important examples that I remember, and if any of you are writing down, you should remember, or you should write them down. He said that any thought that comes to our mind, it needs to be our desires that come to our mind, they need to be guided by our intellect. Okay? Are you listening or are you looking at the door?
I'm sorry.
Okay. No, you're okay, Sheikh. It's just talking to brothers here. Any desire that comes to our mind, anything that we want to do, it has to be guided by our intellect, right? An example of when people don't do that is when someone goes and burns McDonald's because they're angry about the cartoons that were published, right? If you think about it intellectually, there's no connection between that McDonald's. It's not going to affect it in any way. And secondly, any desire that comes to our mind has to be guided by our intellect, and our intellect must be guided by the Sharia. Okay? Our intellect, these are different levels. Sometimes our intellect will tell us to do something which the Sharia prohibits. The Sharia forbids. And in that case, what do we go with? We go with the Sharia and not with our intellect, right? So that's one example. Second example he gave was, let's imagine that a little puppy comes and bites, bites your hand, right? Now, if any of you has had experience like this, I've never had it, but the way he would explain it, I would explain it the same way, that when the puppy bites on, in the beginning he's just like holding on. It doesn't hurt, right? So, do you take a big knife and stab him right then? No. But you first tap him. Maybe he'll let go, right? But then let's say he goes deeper. And you basically give him a little harder tap. Maybe he'll let go then. He goes even deeper. And then you maybe grab him, right? He goes even deeper. And he's sinking his teeth into your hand. And now maybe you want to do a little bit, maybe you want to hit him with something to make him get off. But the first step you take is usually never take a knife and stab him, right? So a lot of times when we see something which is wrong, right? Like cartoons get published or something, someone says something insulting about Islam or Muslims, we tend to go with that knife response, right? Take the knife and stab him. But we have to see what is the least amount of thing that we have to do that could actually get rid of this, right? For example, if someone just tapped that puppy and he got off, you have to do no evil, right? You have to do nothing negative. Sometimes that professor might just need to be talked to outside the room and be like, Professor, I just wanted to talk to you and ask you if what books you read that you got this information from, because I have read the sources of Islam and I know that this is not true. Maybe that will do the job, and maybe the next day they'll come back and they'll respect you even more, right? And this is something, remember how I was saying the person who takes the initiative? In one of my classes there was a professor, and let's just say everybody was kind of frustrated by him, right? He would make us read a whole book. You had to come in Monday morning, and the first thing would be a quiz on the whole book. And then he would talk about the vocabulary that he used in the quiz for the whole class and not talk about the book. Can you imagine how frustrating that is, that you're up all weekend reading this book, and then he doesn't actually talk about the book, but he says, okay, this word in the quiz called mutually exclusive, who knows what that means? And the whole class goes on that. So finally one day I said, man, I can't take this anymore. So I said, Professor, you know, I wonder what we can do about this, because what we are feeling is frustration. We were up all weekend reading this book, and now you don't even talk about that. So he gave a response, and I gave a response, and a few other people jumped in on my side. But then in the end, he actually respected me, right? If I went behind his back and did something negative, that would be worse, right? That would actually make him hate me. So we just have to see what is the best response. So one of the things that we can do to show our love to the Prophet ﷺ is to always defend him. If anyone says anything against him, but remember I said that defending does not mean immediately stabbing. Okay? You might just have to really use your creativity and see what is the best way. Another thing we can do to show our love to the Prophet ﷺ. Anyone? Any sisters?
What was the question?
Oh, the question was, Sheikh, the question is not for you.
Okay.
Okay. The question is, what can we do to reciprocate the love the Prophet ﷺ had for us in action? Another big one about this, in this line, is to always perform our sunnahs. Okay? Always perform our sunnahs. Remember, all of our salah is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we know that the fard is the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we must pay that. We must fulfill that right. And the sunnahs, they come to us because we know that the Prophet ﷺ used to pray these. So when a person that you love sees something as important, to show our love, we also look at that thing as something important. Like for example, the Prophet ﷺ used to love and really honor the friends of his first wife, Khadija radiallahu anha. And the reason why he did that is because Khadija radiallahu anha really loved them. So even after she passed away, to show the love that he had for Khadija, he used to really honor her friends. So these sunnahs that we hear, sometimes people say, oh, this is just a sunnah, right? If we really have the love for the Prophet ﷺ, we would actually really honor that sunnah. We want to say this is just a sunnah. We would say this is something that used to be done by someone I love. He used to do it to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm going to do it to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are many more in the same line. The question is, if we had to come up with a formula, right? What would be the formula? What would be the formula that we can say any action that comes to us, we can see whether this actually falls in line with our love for the Prophet ﷺ and with Sharia, or does it not fall in line? Can anyone give an example of such a formula? And the amazing thing is that Allah sent it to us in the Quran. Yes.
If you love me, follow Muhammad sallam, then I will love you. That's what it says.
إن كنتم تحبون الله فاتبعوني. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that if you love me, if you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam say to them, then follow me. Right? That's a really important one, to follow the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And also, there's a surah, a very short surah that almost all of us know. It's Surah Al-Asr. Right? وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. You know what Imam al-Shafi'i says about this surah? He says that this surah is a roadmap of the life of a Muslim. If there was nothing else that was revealed to guide us as to what we are supposed to do, except this surah would have been enough, insufficient. That this surah serves as a roadmap as to what we are supposed to do. And what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He says that all of humanity is in loss. He swears by time first. And he says all of humanity is in loss except for people who have these 4 qualities. And what are they? Number 1, the people who have knowledge. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. What's the difference? Amanu normally is translated as what? Belief. Those who believe, right? Where comes knowledge? The fact of the matter is that a person does not believe until they have knowledge. Okay? A person does not and cannot believe until they have knowledge. If I ask you, so do you believe in Europa? Right? How many people know what Europa is? What is it? Huh?
A Roman goddess?
Roman goddess. Astaghfirullah. We don't believe in that. Actually, let me ask you a different question. Where did Romans get their names from?
Stars.
From the stars, right? Europa is actually one of the moons of Saturn. That is the most like Earth so far. Okay? So they used to look at them, they used to give them a name, and they used to say this is one of our gods. Or they used to name their gods like them, right? So those of you who did not know what Europa was, if I asked you, can you bet $10 that Europa is going to be seen tonight? You have no knowledge of Europa. You wouldn't be willing to risk anything, right? So that is why belief requires knowledge. And as a Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said that seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim, man and woman, right? So the first thing, knowledge, which leads to belief. Which leads to belief. Second, action upon that knowledge. What is third? What is the third? In Surah Al-Asr. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ.
Patience.
Huh?
Patience.
Patience is not the third.
Truth.
Truth, right? Encouraging other people upon the truth. And this basically, in easier terms, it is actually calling people towards that knowledge and action that you are doing, right? Not only a person believes, but they act upon it, but they also tell other people about it, right? Remember when I was saying that you're sitting in the train and someone is being insulted, someone is being abused? Part of this, number 3, is that you actually take a stance on what is the right thing to do, right? You have to stand up for the justice, for the truth. So that's number 3, which is da'wah, right? Calling people towards that goodness and the haqq that you know. And lastly, what's last?
Patience.
Patience. Patience in what? Patience in what? Yes.
Hardship.
Patience in hardship. What kind of hardships?
Like if you pray, like there's nowhere you can find.
Right, right.
Find where be patient, not just forget about it.
Exactly. Patience and hardship in following the deen. But because you know why? The way it works is that if you believe and you are acting upon it and you're calling other people towards it, you will be faced with problems. You will be faced with difficulties. You will be faced with hardships, right? Imagine, we don't have to imagine that those of us living in New York, being a Muslim and practicing Islam is like holding on to a hot coal, right? Everyone around us is committing sin, right? There's a certain way of life. For example, only in college, if you look at American culture, in American culture, do you know what college means? And why do all American kids insist on going away for school? Right? Partying. That's all college means. College is considered to be the pinnacle of their life. Until when they're young, they're waiting until they go to college, and when they are old, they have graduated from college, they always think back to how fun it was in college. In college, they have no holds barred, right? No rules, anything you want to do. Being a Muslim and staying away from that and still being in college is like holding on to a hot coal. And that is where patience is required. When you are going to be the first guy who would say, you know what, you have to stop insulting that woman in the train. When you're going to be the first one, someone else is going to get up and be like, why don't you stay quiet because you have no business in it, right? They might even come and attack you for it, right? That is where patience is required. Being the first to take initiative for goodness, that's where patience is going to be required. getting up for Fajr, that's where patience is going to be required. And if you look at the Prophet ﷺ, that is all his life was. Knowledge came to him. He believed in it. He acted upon it, and he started calling towards it. When he started calling towards it, look at how many hardships came to him, but he continued to call towards them, and he continued to be patient. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq, to be patient, to actually hold our food back while we just finish our thing. And we ask Him to give us patience in everything that comes in life. And we ask Him to give us the tawfiq to follow the sunnah. And we ask Him to give us tawfiq to really be able to show our love back to the Prophet ﷺ the way he did for us, even though it would not be possible for us to do in this life. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. I know that many of you are busy eating, but if anyone has any questions, I'm here, inshallah.